What's up YouTube, this is Tubedigga. This video is a beginner's guide to mixing and mastering. Now I've left the title non-machine specific, as in it's not the beginner's guide to mixing and mastering on the MPC, because I want this video to help other people with other groove boxes like Electrons or Rolands or any other old groove box, not just the MPCs and legacy MPCs and of course the MPC Live. Some of the techniques, or most of the techniques in this video, you can apply it to other groove boxes as long as you've got a relatively decent amount of mixing options within that particular machine. The second part of this video is going to be about mastering. Again, I'm going to do that in Ableton Live, but please don't be put off if you don't use Ableton Live. The techniques in that will also translate if you use Logic or FL Studio or Reaper or something. As long as you've got a decent multi-band EQ, compressor and limiter, you should be good to go. So the first thing that I want to talk about is your master volume. So I never reduce the master volume on my MPC unless I just need to do it very quickly to answer the phone or listen to something. Generally this is always up at full volume, and if I do need to take the volume down of my entire output, I'll just use my mixing desk. This always stays at 0 because it does have an effect on the choices that you make with the channel mixer and the pad mixer and the master output. So I never have this reduced. This is always at full maximum. You want everything that's coming before that to hit this at a decent level, and then you want this to hit your mixing desk and your audio interface at the maximum level before it starts getting distorted. There's no reason to really have this at 3/4 of the way up, only for listening purposes. Let's go and look at the channel mixer. So when it comes to programs, for this project, I'm just using one program. If you're just using one program in your own project, I recommend that you don't touch this volume level at all. This should just stay at 0 and all your mixing should occur with the individual pads in that program. If you're using multiple programs like a key group program and other drum programs that have got bass and vocal and stuff, and you've just separated them logically like you would in a DAW where you've got mixed groups, so you've done all your fine mixing with all the individual sounds, and then you've grouped things together, so when you go to do your final mix it's a lot easier and you've just got 4 groups, for example. That's the only time that I would start reducing the volumes of these to get them balanced with one another. But if you're just using one program, keep it at 0. I would never ever go into the maximum values with that, there's no point. Let's also look at the masters. So again, if you're using more than the outputs 1 and 2, you know, you might be routing some sub bass through your other outputs 3 and 4, or whatever other machine you've got, if you've got additional auxiliary outputs. Again, the only time that these should be adjusted below 0 would be if you're using multiple outputs. But for this project, I'm just using just outputs 1 and 2. So that just needs to stay where it is. Likewise for the returns, there's no reason to increase or decrease these. These can just stay at 0 dB, and the amount of the effect that you're sending is just adjusted at the pad level. So let's now look at the pad mixer. So this is where things start getting a bit more involved and interesting. This is where I would apply what I refer to as headroom mixing. Once I've got all my sounds working well together, it might just be the case that things aren't really sounding that punchy. I don't really want to apply a compressor. I want to get the things mixed well together before I start adding any effects or compression. Things like EQ and compression should be only used as a last resort or as an effect, particularly with compression. If you just want the compressor to give a sound a certain feel to make it more aggressive or pumping, then use it as an effect. But in a mixing context, I would only ever use that as a last resort, or when I go to do the mastering, which I'll show you later on in this video. So headroom mixing is basically the principle that, let's just choose our first pad, which is a kick drum. If we're at 0 here, that might be far too loud, and then you'll start finding that it will have a knock-on effect for the choices you make with the program. So if you don't adjust that kick drum at the pad level, you're going to start bringing this down. And I said before that this shouldn't really be reduced here unless you've got multiple programs. and also with the master output. So this at 0, or any sound at 0, you've only got 6 decibels, or that amount of physical space, like 1 centimetre on this screen, to move up. Okay, if all your sounds are at 0, you're going to be struggling to balance them alongside each other. It's much better to bring all your volumes down to absolute silence. So this might be a bit scary for some people, because it's like, well, I've got my pads all nicely balanced and mixed. That's fine if you want to keep them that way and then move on to the mastering and recording process. But if you're still not happy with it, it's a good idea to bring everything down, play back your sequence. Okay, so my sequence is going to play back from bar 33 because it's a bit busier there. Let's go back to the pad mixer. And then slowly start introducing your sounds and balancing them up. You don't really want things, or your loudest sounds, to be, up at 0, or even sort of -9 would be too loud. I'm expecting that this kick drum should be around -11, and then we'll be hitting on this master output, roughly around -10, -9 dB when it's playing back with all the other sounds. Okay, so there's our kick drum. So on its own, it's kind of hitting around -12, which is fine, which is where it's set here, 11.8 dB, or -11.8. So I've got my speakers up loud enough for me to hear this at a relatively decent volume. Here's our snare. Now I've got a second kick on pad 6, so I'm going to bring that in. It's got a bit more weight to it. So I don't really want my final output to be going much past -9, -6 at the very most. Bring the bass line in. I'm just going to stop that. You're going to find that because you've brought everything down to its lowest level, or silence, you might have to increase the level of whatever you're listening to your machine on. In my case, it's a mixing desk. So I've increased the master output of that, so I can now bring up the volumes of these, and I don't need them to be so loud for me to hear them. Okay, if that makes sense. So this kick drum is now at -15.1 dB, because I'm balancing it up with everything else now. But everything together on this VU meter for the master output is hitting around -9, okay? So the whole track needs to be around -10, -9 dB. It doesn't have to be, and you might have a lot more engineering experience than I, and sitting there watching this going, why? Or why are you doing that? It's just my method. You can choose to follow it or not. I recommend that, before you start recording stuff, you just want things to be hitting around that point. You don't want this to be going into the red at all. Okay, so I'm going to press play back again and get these sounds a bit better balanced. So you'll find that once you've done that process of reducing all your individual pads to absolute silence and then slowly start introducing them, you've got a lot more headroom to play with, because you've increased the volume of whatever you're using to listen to your mix, and then you're giving yourself a lot more space in this physical area here to balance your tracks, and things will start to sound a lot less crowded. So if you've got any comments or questions on that headroom mixing technique, please put them down below. But it's pretty simple. It's as simple as that. It's just a case of reducing all your volumes to nothing or to silence, increasing your listening level with something like the MPC X and MPC Live, it's really easy to do that because they're very low noise machines. So because you've brought down all the volumes of everything, for this particular track it's not such a problem because I can see on this VU meter that I'm hitting a relatively decent level. But you might find that you're only hitting sort of -24 or -18 or something, or whatever you're using to monitor your actual output levels that you're getting. And you might find that when you go to record, the levels that your recording device or your software is receiving is quite low. And then when you go and boost that volume, whether you actually increase the gain of the waveform itself or apply the mastering technique that I'm going to show you, because you've recorded it in live, so in my case I've got an Allen & Heath analog mixer, you're going to pick up noise along the way. I recommend, if you've got the facility, as you do have in the MPC Live and MPC X, is to actually bounce that as a digital file, because then you won't pick up any noise even if the track is quite low. You'll just be boosting that digital signal and you won't be boosting any analog noise that's been picked up either from your audio interface or your mixing desk. That's pretty much the mixing process. Just to summarise, master volume up full. Any of your programs should be at 0 unless you've got multiple programs that you need to balance so they work in relationship to one another. The returns, again, at 0, your masters at 0, unless you're using multiple master outputs. Then all the mixing occurs with your individual pads. Bring them all down to absolute silence and then slowly introduce things so you get a nice, clear, unmuddy mix before you go to master. So let's now look at the computer and talk about mastering. So if you do have an MPC Live or MPC X, I recommend that you use the Export Audio Mixdown facility that they both have. The reason why I recommend that is because if you're recording your project or your song live into a mixing desk or an audio interface, there's a higher chance, particularly if your overall volume is a little bit low because you've done the headroom mixing that I recommended, there's a higher chance that you're going to pick up some noise along the way, whether you're using a digital or analog mixing desk or whatever sound card or interface that you're recording into. If you export as a digital file from the MPC Live or MPC X, you're not going to pick up any of that noise, no matter how low the actual digital file that you've exported is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record this into Ableton Live, and then I'll do a comparison between the signal to noise ratio that you get when recording in with a relatively low volume from your MPC or whatever machine you're using, and I'll do a comparison with the exported digital file. So I'm going to play this track from the start where there's not an awful lot going on, and you'll definitely be able to hear that noise that you get when you haven't got a decent amount of volume to mask that. So I'm going to mute my microphone and record a few bars of this into Ableton Live. Okay, so as you can see, the overall volume of this recording isn't that loud. So if we boost this, whether it's using the techniques I'm going to show you in the mastering section, or if we actually increase the gain of this audio file from here in Ableton Live, we can just boost it from here. That's going to increase any noise that we've picked up from the MPC X going into the mixing desk and the mixing desk going into the computer. It's most likely going to be noise from the mixing desk because the MPC X is pretty low noise. But obviously if you're recording a low signal from the MPC X or whatever machine you're using, that's where you're going to be running into problems with the signal to noise ratio. So let's increase the volume of this so the main part of the recording is relatively loud. Don't worry about these peaks here, that's what we're going to correct when we do the actual mastering process. But let's play this back now and you can already hear that hiss. Now I did mute my microphone, so that isn't hiss from my microphone or air in the room. That's actual noise that's picked up because we're recording at such a low level. And you can hear it over the top of the recording as well. It's going to be masked slightly with the drums, but I can still hear it even when, you know, we've got quite a lot of volume and the track is a bit busier. So I'm just going to go into MPC 2.1 and I'm going to export this as an audio mixdown. Okay, so stereo output 1 and 2, it's WAV 16-bit. I'm going to choose 48 kilohertz and I'm going to export that. So let's just put it on my desktop. There you go, desktop, save. And I'm going to bring this into Ableton Live and we can compare the amount of noise. So this hasn't been boosted at all. I've not chosen to normalize it or anything like that. It's just been exported at exactly the same volume level as the recording that I just made into Ableton Live. But because we're bypassing my mixing desk, we're not going to be picking up any potential noise. So let's just close that. Go to my desktop in Ableton. And there you go, night vision, that's our track. So there you go. It's the same volume as this. Let's actually reduce that down to what it was originally. Okay, so you can see it's a little tiny bit louder. Okay, but let's listen to the start of it. There's absolutely no noise there, and actually that, see, it's marginally louder. Okay, but this section here is very similar in level. Okay, it's only where you can see the drums there that this is a little bit louder, but there's absolutely no noise on that at all. In this space as well here. So if you do have an MPC Live or MPC X, that's why I recommend exporting as a mixdown rather than recording it live, so to speak, into your DAW. If you don't have an MPC Live or MPC X, I recommend you get that volume, the overall volume, as loud as you can. So let's talk about mastering. So the first thing I'm going to add to this track is an EQ8. Now I'm not sure what the equivalent would be in another DAW like Logic or Pro Tools, but you basically need an EQ that you can have multiple frequency points like this, okay? So if I press this symbol here, which is the display toggle, then I can look at the actual frequency spectrum here. And what we're going to do is create very narrow frequency bands with these frequency selectors, so we can sweep through and detect any resonant frequencies that are going to pose potential problems when we go to actually master this audio file. So the way we do that is increase the actual Q value of each of these points. We also need to change the shape of the filter to a bell, and it will do exactly that. It will ring out when you increase the gain of these. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. Let's change all these to the bell filter shape and increase the Q of each of these to maximum, which in the EQ8 is 18. Okay. Now this little symbol here is so we can audition the resonant frequencies and isolate those so we don't hear the rest of the track. So I'll show you what I mean in a sec. Let's activate that. Now the next thing we want to do is grab the most busiest part of the track. Now I know this portion up here is the loudest, but I'm actually going to choose this section here because it's a bit more consistent and it occurs here and here as well. So I'm going to choose this section. I'm just going to loop it over. I'm going to press play back on Ableton Live and I'm going to grab this number 8 point here, and now that I'm pressing down on that with my mouse button, we're just isolating this frequency. Okay, so what we're looking for is that blue to actually fill this peak or fill this actual narrow band that we've created here. If it starts going beyond the center line here up into that actual peak, we know that we've got a problem there and we need to adjust the gain of this. So it's getting a bit louder here. It's not too bad. Okay, so that's potentially a problem. It's not too bad. So I can just bring that down. So I'm just going to stop that. I recommend that you bring the gain down here. If you start trying to bring it down on here, there's a chance that you can actually go left and right and actually lose the actual point in the frequency spectrum that you're trying to adjust. So we just need to literally bring it down a couple of dBs. That's all. So it's just a small little trough now that we've created. So now we want to grab our 7th point. So I've no idea where that's gone actually. There it is. It doesn't matter what order you can do these in. They can actually be freely moved all around here. But let's just do it in order for the sake of this video. So I'll press play back again and try and find another resonant frequency. There's potentially some up the top there, but nothing that's major at this point. Okay, so that's a little bit louder as well. So we can bring that one down. And let's grab our 6th point. So the less of these points that you can detect, the better really. It shows that your sounds are actually working quite well together and there's not an awful lot of clashes. But there will, I guarantee there will be some. But it's actually not too bad. I thought this might be a bit more problematic than it. Oh, there you go. So that's a real big one. Okay, so that's a real problem area there. So if we were going to boost this without mastering, well, with the limiter and the compressor, that's really going to pose a problem when getting the maximum signal. Okay, so let's definitely reduce that down. Actually, that's the wrong one. Let's bring that down now. So let's just move on to our 5th. So that could do with a little bit of reduction. Let's pull that down a tiny bit, not too much. Let's now increase number 4 and sweep across with that. So if you actually move it on the EQ8 itself, it doesn't do the audition. You have to actually click on it on here. Okay, so I'm just gonna do these last few. There could potentially be more, and I'll show you how to deal with that in a second if there is. Okay, there's one there. So there are lots of points in between that are just tipping over, but it's the ones where you really start to feel that actual peak that you've created that are the ones that you really want to focus on. This is the second from last, so we're nearly done. Okay, so that's quite a problem. Let's bring that down. And we've got our last one here. So these ones that are in the low range aren't so much of a problem because they're a bit more consistent. But there will be some here in the sort of lower. It's basically where the bass and the kick drums are going to be sort of there, that one. Okay, let's bring that down. Okay, so that's pretty decent now. So I'm not going to do any more. If you find that you've got a lot more than these 8 can cater for, it's just a simple case of duplicating this EQ8 and resetting all the gains. Okay, so we can just do a right click, sorry, at the top there, and we can reset all gains. Sorry, it's a little bit off the screen there, but we just reset all the gains and then we just do the same process. We sweep through again and find any other resonant peaks that we want to eliminate or reduce. But for the sake of this video, that's basically the process that you want to follow when you go to get rid of any resonant frequencies or resonant peaks that are going to be a problem for you. So the next thing that we want to add is a compressor. So with the compressor, we want to disable the makeup. So the makeup is the makeup gain. So any reduction that we apply it using this compressor, the makeup will actually compensate and boost. We don't want to do that. We want to use the limiter to do that, which I'll add after this. So I'm going to undo or disable the makeup. Now we can keep the ratio at 2, that is fine, 2 to 1. Now the attack, I recommend it's good to have something around 150 milliseconds. Okay, so it's a relatively slow attack, but it's not so slow that things are going to start to sound a bit sort of soft and fluffy. We don't want a really hard attack. We just want this nice kind of middle ground here, about 150 milliseconds. With the release, we want this at about 300 milliseconds. So it's just quite a nice middle ground. I'll show you what I mean in a second. We want to leave this auto release off. So I've set my release to about 355 milliseconds. Now I'm going to press play back on the track again. And we're going to start slowly bringing the threshold down of this compressor. Now we need to keep an eye on this gain reduction meter, which is in the middle of the threshold and the output. As soon as that starts hitting here, which is -6 dB, okay, that's where we want to stop our threshold. That's where we want to stop applying the threshold. And there you go. It's just starting to hit that level now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is play it back again quickly and just disable the compressor so you can hear that. So there's not an awful lot of difference in the actual overall output or volume of that wave file or this audio file when I disable the compressor, whether it's disabled or enabled. It's adding a real subtle amount of push, just so it's more of a consistent sound, and it is just gently brightening up this waveform and making it a little bit more lively. It's very, very subtle, and you only really notice it when you start adding the limiter and increasing the overall volume of it. So I'll play back again with it disabled, and then I'll enable it again. So it's very, very, very subtle. There's no point in me playing with the release and attack times. I'll actually do it just so you can hear it. If I bring the attack right down, then it starts pumping. That's why I recommend that you have your attack up about 150. Okay. I'll also play back again and adjust the release time. So now you can see our gain reduction isn't really taking as much of effect because the release time is so short that the actual compression is barely noticeable now. And we're just getting that gain reduction just kind of coming in and out nice and gently. It's not like when you kind of want to slam drums, you know, when you're actually affecting an individual sound like drums or a vocal or something, and you really want to give it that kind of pulsing and pumping effect. But when it comes to mastering, you don't really want to be giving it too much of that, because things are going to start sounding like they're jumping around all over the place. So that's the compression. So we've dealt with the EQ, we've dealt with the compression. The last thing that we want to add is a limiter, so we can start increasing the overall volume of this. So I'm actually going to bring down my Mac volume, because this is going to get loud now. And I'm going to start increasing the gain. So we don't want to touch the ceiling here. We want to leave the stereo, that's all good. This look ahead we don't need to touch. All we need to do is switch off the auto release and bring the release down. So the release is also a relatively sort of short release for this limiter. Okay, so we don't want to match the release time to the compressor. They're completely separate from each other at this stage. We just want to have a relatively short release, 0.3 milliseconds is fine. And this will allow us to start increasing the gain of the limiter and avoid any potential distortion. I'm going to press play back on the sequencer, and I'm going to start increasing the gain. Now what we're looking for is the overall output from this limiter is going to be hitting -6 dB. Anything beyond that, we're going to start distorting. So I'm going to increase the volume of my computer now. And that's it for the actual plugins. Okay, so I'm sorry if I've not explained this thoroughly as to what's going on here. I'll just do a brief overview. So the EQA is removing any resonant frequencies or peaks in the signal where you've got some frequencies that are clashing and creating that kind of ringing sound. So the compression is just gently pushing back and pushing forward our signal, you know, depending on whether it's quiet or loud, just to make it a bit more consistent throughout. I'll show you what I mean in a second. When I actually record this in, I'm going to actually record this in live or resample it back into Ableton, and you'll see that the actual recording that I get will be a lot more consistent. It won't have all these peaks here, and that's what enables you to actually boost the entire volume of this entire track. Obviously, if we've got low points like this, that's okay if it's just an intro, but if we've got dips along the way, it's going to be really hard for us to boost those quiet bits without actually clipping the sort of louder bits here. By doing it this way, you're actually just applying that slight bit of compression to balance and level things out a little bit. So you're going to push up the quiet bits and bring down the loud bits, just so they're all a bit more consistent with each other. And then the limiter is just allowing us to boost that overall signal and not clip or distort. So I'm going to flick my second track into resampling mode and arm it, and we're just going to record the entire track now. And the reason I do this instead of exporting it as a WAV file is that we can actually see this getting printed, and it just gives us a really nice bit of visual feedback as to what our compression and limiting and EQ settings have actually done to this original waveform. So I'm going to record this now, so feel free to skip through the video. I'm going to actually do this live, or you can just sit through and watch it get recorded. So you're actually going to see it appear here in this secondary track now. Right, so I've stopped it there, guys. There's no point in me, recording the whole thing, but you get the idea. So that's it, guys. Relatively crude way to master your tracks without having to actually go and buy an expensive mastering VST or something like that. You can actually do it all in the box as long as you've got some of these EQs and compressors and limiters that have got a similar feature set. It's just a matter of getting rid of your resonant peaks, doing a subtle bit of compression, and then using the limiter to boost the overall gain of your waveform or your recording. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, guys. Please do put any comments or questions below. Please like, share and subscribe. And also, guys, if you like the video content that I'm producing for you on YouTube, to help me to continue giving you these free tutorials, any contribution that you can afford would be very much appreciated. You could just click on the PayPal link down below and just contribute any amount of your choice. I would be very grateful. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you on the next one. This is Tubedigga, and I'm out.